sex, life, and tech. If you're 21 or 101, we love them all. Welcome to Age Blind with Nancy AF.
Hey, boys and girls, welcome to Age Blind, where the date on your birth certificate is totally meaningless. And because we're recording Halloween month, October, we are focusing all month long on scary shit. And when I come back from work at the end of the day, I'm one of those women who relaxes by watching true crime or reality TV. I have always liked scary movies, although my taste has definitely evolved as I've gotten older, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And I have an amazing guest today who was referred to me by one of my other guests, Heather Britton. And today's guest is named Tom Ryan, and he is actually in the scary movie business. So welcome, Tom. Tell us, how did you get into the genre of horror, and why do you like it?
Okay, well, hi Nancy. Thanks for having me on. How did I get into horror? Well, I was probably born in one of the greatest ages of the development of horror in cinema. In the late 70s and the early 80s, I got to experience just very classic staples in the horror genre, and that were also, aside from the horror genre, they were just amazing for the cinematic leaps and bounds that we had in special effects and visual effects. I mean, between the science fiction and the horror films that I grew up watching, I was so inspired to get into that kind of creativity. I'd always been an artist. I like to draw comics. I used to like to read comics.
What'd you study in school?
In college, I did study the media arts,
Uh-huh.
but just as a child, for me, it was the golden age of comics, of action movies, of horror movies, of sci-fi movies. All the best of the best was really coming out at the time. And the creative juices were just flowing in me. When I first saw a documentary about the making of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, I saw a lot of stop motion being done, which really grabbed my attention because I was a huge fan of the Ray Harryhausen's work within the Sinbad movies or Jason and the Argonauts or anything like that. And so when I saw these adults playing with toys, doing stop motion, I said, that's great. This is what I want to do. And then when I got more involved in kind of finding out how films were made, I was just inspired so much. And with horror, it was just something that my friends and I really shared a love for. Films like Friday the 13th, The Exorcist, The Omen, all that stuff was really just fresh in everybody's mind culturally. And that's what really pulled me into that genre and pulled me into the desire to want to make horror films.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, I mean, for those of our listeners and viewers who, are Gen Z or millennials, I strongly urge you this Halloween to go back and look at some of the early horror stuff, which we're going to talk about in a little while. And even though the special effects, as Tom just said, were really kind of clunky, the imagination behind them, especially with so few technological tools to use, was pretty
Yeah.
amazing. And it's a different kind of horror movie, but the documentary about Charlie Sheen, there's a whole section of his early years where he and Sean Penn would make movies together, like
Yeah.
slasher movies and violent movies. And it was pretty sophisticated stuff, considering it was a couple of boys in Hollywood playing with toys and really rudimentary equipment.
Sure.
Super 8 movie cameras, and, you had to edit, like, using film. I know we're now gonna really sound like
Sure.
old dinosaurs, but,
Yeah.
question for you. I know you have an appreciation for the genre. Do you still get spooked when you see, like, really scary, well-done movies?
Probably not to the same degree for sure. For me now, with what kind of really spooks me and the thrill that I get out of movies are creative scenarios, which then I'll kind of, if you can have your audience thinking about your film after they watch it, it's really effective. Jump scares are really effective, don't get me wrong, and grotesque special effects on screen or shock scares like that are really effective. But for me, it's when you go home and you kind of start thinking about a very relatable scenario and how terrifying something like that would be. A great movie that's an example of that is like the Saw movies, where somebody's got you trapped and you have to kind of get out of that trap. And that's the kind of stuff that I find things a lot more eerie than I do like scary or frightening when I watch films now. And plus, as kind of a lifelong horror fan, I find so much of that trip very fun and entertaining, and I'm actually looking for them to kind of scare me or freak me out a little bit.
Well,
And
you
so,
just said something that's so spot on because
yeah,
yesterday The Birds was on TV. I didn't watch it, but we're going to talk a little bit about what some of our favorite horror movies are, both old and new. And as I was putting my list together, I realized that two of my favorites, old school horror movies, are Psycho, which doesn't have any blood in it at all. The original
yeah,
Hitchcock movie, other than the blood swirling down the
the
drain.
drain.
It's a
Yep.
slasher movie without any slashing. Birds, which is about some everyday thing that we see. So you were talking about how really effective horror movies make you, after you've watched them, you find yourself after watching Psycho, you don't want to take a shower. After watching The Birds, you see like 10 birds on a, even though there aren't that many
Wire or
above
something.
ground
Yeah,
wires,
yeah,
but you see birds congregating and you're like, oh shit, I'm really in trouble now.
yeah.
Um, and then one of my favorites, these are the old school ones, The Hunger. And by the way, if you follow me on Substack, and I'll give the information again when we wrap up, I'm going to publish all of these in a list so you don't have to keep track of them. Um, Great movie called The Hunger with David Bowie, Catherine Deneuve, and Susan Sarandon about vampires during the disco era, which
Yeah.
is kind of funny and weird. And then a couple of other old school favorites, Don't Look Now with Julie Christie, and Dressed to Kill,
Sure.
which
Michael
had
Caine.
Michael Caine in it and Angie Dickinson, names that our younger viewers and listeners probably go like, who the fuck was that? But, some really well done, George Romero, um, original old school filmmakers who didn't have a whole lot to work with, or the original Night of the Living Dead, black and white.
Mm-hmm.
It's been remade a bunch of times. Walking Dead, obviously, has
Mm-hmm.
been wildly popular, but some of my old faves are still like the black and white, clunky, no special effects, giant
Sure.
furry spiders chasing after
Sure.
pods turning into people or people turning into pods. I forget which one that was, but
Yeah.
those are some of my old school faves. What about you?
Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Is
Yes,
that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Invasion
Yeah.
of the Body Snatcher. So what are some of
It's one of
your
mine.
old school? Let's define old school. I was just writing about vampire movies.
Mm-hmm.
Nosferatu was made in 1922.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
horror movies have been around long before you and I were on this earth.
Mm-hmm.
But some of your old faves, black and white from the early days?
Yeah, I'll try to give you a few because it's funny. I always try to never answer the what are your favorite movies because it's like what's your favorite song, and it's just there's so many in different times of different days and different experiences that different things apply to the way that you feel about it. But with that said, did come prepared for some movies. So I'm going to start off with the one that I think will really reference what we were just discussing as far as like stuff that carries over into real life. And you saw the birds on the wire and they freak you out a little bit. But one of the most classic and inspirational and influential movies of all time is Jaws. And
Oh,
it
yeah.
really affected people swimming. And it also affected the fishermen going hunting for sharks and killing sharks. And that increased dramatically after that film, as did people deciding that they didn't want to go swimming in the ocean. It affected them that much. And you have people that were afraid to sit on the toilet or go in the bathtub. And it was ridiculous, but it was just like this connectivity, like to this terrifying experience.
And I grew up in Queens. I remember seeing Jaws in one of the high-tech movie theaters where the chairs actually shook.
Oh,
And I
wow.
just saw Wizard of Oz at the Sphere, and like they were doing the same thing with the tornado. I'm like, can't scare me. I've been doing
Yeah.
this since I was 16 years old.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, Jaws was definitely a very impactful movie for me. Another one that I'll mention since you discussed vampires is there's a movie called Near Dark starring Bill Paxton, Lance Henriksen, and the movie it's an incredibly realistic portrayal of what vampires might be like, which are kind of like vagabond gypsy types that travel across the country together, and they're in this family. And it's just a really fun film with different vampire rules than a lot of other movies have. So it really stands out and makes it very interesting. And it was just cinematically just really well done. It's a very cool movie.
Do
It
you know what
feels like,
year it was made?
oh, 87.
All right.
maybe,
So Bill
maybe.
Paxton was, really just getting his career off the
He
ground.
was, he was, yep. It's actually the same lineup as James Cameron's Aliens. They were all the Marines together in Aliens, but in this film they play the vampires. It's a wonderful, fun vampire movie. It's probably my favorite vampire movie, or one of my favorites that kind of maybe sit alongside a few others.
Did you see Lost Boys? Was that the
I
name
did
of
see
it?
Lost Boys. Yeah, I love Lost Boys too. This one is definitely more grounded for adults, I think. The vampires are very diabolical in this one,
Hmm.
and I think you'll love it. I think you should put that on your list. I'm not
I
going to put it anywhere. I'm just telling you, Near Dark. Check it out. You're going to love it. Okay, and then I'll jump into what I showed you previously that sits on my desk here. One of my favorite movies, which happens to be a remake. I did love the original black and white very much as well, but the Thing, right? The Thing was amazing. John Carpenter's The Thing with Kurt Russell. One of my favorites just because of the amazing things that they did with the special effects of the story. You have a heavyweight cast of actors there, guys that were not particular to the horror genre. These were just actors that were in other, big budget movies, Wilford Brimley and guys like this were not in horror movies. And for me, The Thing was just an incredible. I'd seen the original, and then seeing the remake just took everything to just this exceptional level of action, of horror, the prosthetics, the special effects makeup. It was incredible. Just such an impactful movie for me. Absolutely loved it. Loved John Carpenter's work, but this one was, to me, maybe his best film.
You brought up an interesting point, Tom, as somebody in the business. And one of my favorite current day movies,
Hmm.
stars my cousin, Kyle Gallner, um, and it was called Strange Darling. And it's just a really
Right.
well done, well produced movie. It's pretty bloody, but the fact that my cousin was in it made it a little more a little easier to watch. But
Right.
he was a dramatic actor before he started getting into horror movies. He's been in Smile and Smile 2. And, he's now kind of known jokingly as the Scream King. But,
Right.
I remember that was like a transition for him. He used to be like a teen heartthrob, and now he's in all these slasher movies, which I always love turning on the TV and going, "That's my cousin."
Yeah, sure.
But for more conventional actors, do you think they, like, kind of welcome the opportunity to do horror, or does it freak them out before they do it, or they're afraid they're gonna be typecast?
Well, I think from what I have seen over the years, in the 80s, you saw tons of actors that started out in horror movies that later became serious dramatic or actors or in comedies or what have you. And they kind of graduated that horror was their beginning. And then they kind of never went back to it again. Kevin Bacon was in the original Friday the 13th. Johnny Depp
That's
was in
right.
Johnny Depp was in Nightmare on Elm Street. Oh gosh, Jennifer Aniston was in the original Leprechaun movie.
Oh,
So
yeah,
they were
yeah.
all just kids in these movies, and they went on to have these great careers. And then I think Hollywood kind of shifted and treated horror movies like they were a joke. And if you were a serious actor, horror movies were not really recognized at the Oscars or anything. And so if you were a serious actor, you weren't doing horror movies. And now what I find today is that it seems like a lot of seasoned actors are jumping at the chance to appear in a Jordan Peele film or in an Eli Roth film or now they're kind of going back to that where they understand that the genre of horror has a really huge audience, a loyal audience that loves it and really supports it. And a lot of that other work is not doing as well because as we know, with streaming and everything, there's such an abundance of content out these days. But horror really has a fan base that digs in and they love to support it. And I think a lot of those actors are realizing that there are opportunities there to go back and to be successful in the horror genre. And fans find it fun to see these guys kind of coming in and putting their weight behind a film. Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, Silence of
That's
the Lambs
right.
was fantastic. Like you have a heavyweight like that come into a picture and it really gives it a lot of legitimacy. And I think that there's a desire for those actors to get involved in the genre, and the fan base welcomes them because it's great to see them. it's fun to see like Jim Carrey doing a dark role, right? Like I think it was that film that he did. I think it was called oh gosh, Numbers or something like that, or 22 or whatever. I can't remember the name of the film, but he plays like this character that's haunted by these scribblings in this book, and it's just kind of cool to see them take
Oh, yeah,
that
John
turn.
Travolta.
Yeah.
Wasn't Ernest Borgnine in, Willard?
Ernest Borgnine was I don't know if he was in Will. I think he was
Willard
in
is,
Will.
for those of
Yeah.
you, again, who were born after Tom and I were, which is big chunk of the population, if
Right.
you do not like rats, do not see Willard. I don't
Yeah.
like spiders, so I just made a list of the greatest or scariest spider movies of all time, and I was getting creepy crawlies while I was actually keyboarding my list, like, "Ooh, do I really even wanna see this?" So,
Yeah.
but, watching horror can also be really therapeutic
Sure.
because, even though it could make you afraid to go into the shower or look at birds on a wire, you can also say, well, that was fiction and this is reality. And
Yeah.
in reality, this isn't happening.
Yeah, I think that's what makes the horror genre so much fun is that, a comedy or a drama can make us feel like happy or laugh or feel sad about an ending or what have you. And we could we almost very frequently touch on all those emotions anyway in normal life, right? But with horror, like you really don't want to feel fear in real life. You don't want to be in scenarios where you're scared for your life. But when you tap into that in a horror movie, it's really fun for the audience because we get to explore that emotion and that reaction and know that we're safe, right? And know that it's like we get to experience this, but we're strapped in, right? We have the seatbelt on, right? And we're nothing's gonna happen to us. And I think that's what makes horror so much fun is that we get to explore those crazy wild ideas of being chased by a guy with a chainsaw or a monster or transforming into something or aliens coming down and taking over the world. And we know when we walk out of the theater, we get to enjoy all that reaction, all those emotions at the time. And we walk out and it's gone, right? And and we're good. And we think about the movie and maybe it'll freak us out at night. We'll dream about it, but we're safe. And I think it has an edge over dramas and comedies. I mean, action movies are another one that take us to a place where like I can't fight 100 guys in a room with a samurai sword and walk away, but I love to see somebody do that on screen. And so it just gives those films and those genres like an edge up because those are things we really don't get to experience on a daily basis. Where like comedy, yeah, you have friends that are funny, you can watch funny jokes, this stuff can make you laugh and things can make you sad and things can make you happy and you have relationships and you feel love. But when it comes to fear and extreme action, it's really kind of cool to enjoy those in the movies and walk away unharmed, right?
Exactly, and as I've gotten older, Tom, I really am learning a lot more about, body chemistry and hormones, like, thank you for the compliment. You told me that I don't look like I'm almost 70, and
Not
I
at all.
jokingly said it's because I'm a vampire, um, that I've been feeding, which is kind of true because I've always worked in tech and in the arts, and I feed off of the energy of younger people in those categories. And I don't like literally feed off of them because that would be gross and illegal. But when I'm surrounded by youth and beauty, it does, instead of saying, oh, those were my old days, I'm not like that again, I feel like I absorb that energy.
Right.
And there are chemical reasons for that. And if you want to get geeky about it and really do some deep diving into what happens to the human body in times of fear, it's really fascinating to see how it impacts your brain, your body,
Yeah.
your hormone production. But too steady a diet of it will definitely freak you out. Like I said, I'm a true crime fan, but I limit myself to how many stories I watch over the course of a year of how people ended up getting murdered after matching with somebody on Bumble. Like, I don't
Yeah.
need
Just
to see that.
There's nothing more frightening than watching the real life stories or documentaries about killers among us. There's nothing more frightening than that to me because that is real life, and those are people that did not look like they were disfigured and burned, and these are not people that were monsters, or at least not in the physical sense. They weren't vampires or werewolves. They were your neighbors, teachers, bosses,
Ted
employees.
Bundy,
Yeah,
perfect example. Good looking
yeah,
guy. used his looks and his charm to convince young women to get into cars with him. There still are those people. They're still living among us.
Right.
So
Right.
we're about to wrap up, Tom. This has been terrific for my listeners and viewers. You all have heard this before, that when I did my analytics after my first year of podcasting, I discovered that most people were logging out at 17 minutes. So I'm like, why am I even going the extra 15 or 20? Let me just stop at 20. And if people want more, they'll just message me and say, get Tom on again as a guest, and I will happily do that. So you've been so terrific, Tom. If people want to follow you and see the work that you've done, where can they find you? Where can they creep on you?
Yeah, so first they can visit our website. It's www.theaterofterror.net, and theater is spelled Theatre. And you'll see links to my work there. It's a great website to just navigate and just find out a lot about us and what we do. We're also on Facebook at theaterofterror.net, Twitter at Theater Terror, and Instagram Theater Terror. Not of, just Theater Terror on both of those. So yeah, reach out, let's connect, and let's talk about horror movies.
Cool, cool. And yes, we're going to be doing an episode on holiday movies, some of which are horror movies too, which is
Yeah.
interesting how those two genres have coalesced.
Yes.
So I do plan on leaning in next year. Podcast themes are sex, life, and tech. And horror movies and entertainment in general straddle all three of those things because people love watching other people have sex. Tech is used to
Right.
create better art,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all just part of life. So if you want to follow me, it's nancyaf_ on Instagram. It's nancyaf.com. And obviously, if you're listening to this, you found me, but we are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your poison. If you'd like to watch, you can watch on YouTube, me and my podcast skeleton, my prop for the day. And whether you're watching black and white horror movies from the 1920s or you're waiting for the remake of Bride of Frankenstein to be released next year, remember, no matter where you get your content or your creative, remember to be age blind because every generation has something to offer. And there are very few things today that haven't existed in another form in another generation. So that is why I talk about what I talk about, and I bring all generations together to focus on what we have in common as opposed to the things that divide us, because there's way too much division in the world. Speaking of horrible things, and let's just keep it real, keep it raw, and peace out.